너는 나를 왜 찾았어?
12년 전에?
응.
그게 그렇게 궁금해?
Welcome back to Oscar in the Middle, everybody. Today we are talking about Maestro and past lives. Well, we are coming right up onto the Oscars, and man, no one cares. But I don't blame them, and that is for a different video. So we're gonna just talk about movies today. But aside from how people feel about the actual awards, the movies are really what we're there for. It's what we love, what we want to talk about. Of course, a couple of these I've already talked about in reviews in the past year, but there were more than a few that I still hadn't gotten to see. And the ones that we're talking about today I chose because they are, free. So let's start with Maestro. Maestro is the biopic of famous conductor Leonard Bernstein and his complicated relationship with actress Felicia Montealegre Cohn-Bernstein. It stars Bradley Cooper and Carey Mulligan. So obviously from A Star is Born, we've already seen that Bradley Cooper has a very good handle on how to direct and how to tell a story visually. He has a really good sense of how to do that. But in this one, he really proves himself. He takes it so much further with compositions of shots, with uses of lighting and motion or lack thereof. He really has a handle on how to shoot, especially for different decades, how to kind of parody those looks. Because it starts off older in black and white, and it's got like the 4:3 framing, everything that kind of signifies that this is going to be like an older movie. And it's got a lot of musicality to it, a lot of motion. It's pumping, it's jiving, and then it gets to a lot more static shots. It's in color, but it's desaturated. It feels a lot quieter. And there's that really big contrast, not only visually, but going along with the story that started off really happy and full of love, and then kind of goes into some bad territory. Now, say what you will about this movie, but the acting was amazing. Yes, it does feel a little bit Oscar baity, and I will talk about that in a moment, but they still did a phenomenal job. Bradley Cooper, he honestly just dove into this role. Now, we already know this because he spent 6 years practicing for a single scene. I don't necessarily think that it was that serious, but he did really commit himself to the role, and I have to give him that. He dives into it, he kind of blends into this character, and it's not just because they put a lot of prosthetics on him, but really in the actual acting in this character, it's like he really honored this guy and wanted to bring him to life. And there are just a couple, at least, just tremendous moments of emotion from him in this role, specifically later in the movie. One thing I did forget to mention in the pros was the prosthetics and the makeup and the aging. Aside from whatever controversiality there was in that, the actual craft of it, the aging him decade by decade and the prosthetics, it was very believable for both of them. And they did a very, very good job on that, so props to them. And Carey Mulligan acting opposite him did equally just as incredible. She has a couple monologues in here that are really difficult, and she executes them very, very well. Plus, there is a subplot that comes towards the end that takes up pretty much the rest of the movie, in which she just does such an amazing job. Actually, they both do. It's a very hard topic to talk about, and it's done with such sensitivity, holding on shots for really long periods of time, really letting you sit in the emotion. And while a lot of the things that come up towards the end are really, really good scenes, it didn't feel like this was the movie to put them in or do it from another character's perspective. So while it does have some really great highs, the problem with this movie and why it does feel so Oscar baity to me, I couldn't find the point of making the movie. I didn't know why they decided to put all this effort into making it. And it's partly because of a problem I have with a lot of biopics now, and partly because of its own problems. Mostly it's because we've seen a lot of this in other movies. It didn't really feel like it knew what it wanted to focus on, because it focused a little bit, for sure, of course, on his musical career, but it was mostly focused on his relationship and his marriage, which is A, been done before, and B, not what we're here to see. This guy was an incredible conductor. So obviously we want to see more about him conducting and the struggles with that. Now, we do get to see that throughout the movie, and there's, of course, the one incredible 6-minute scene that Bradley Cooper spent, 6 years basically practicing for, in which he does conduct, and it is flawlessly done. It's beautiful. That's kind of in the background, and that's really weird considering it's about a conductor. It's mostly about his marriage, and I don't want to say I didn't care, but like, we've seen it. This is what every biopic does. They pick a person, they talk about their musical or acting or whatever his career for a little bit, and then mostly go into their personal life, which usually has the same beats and same problems to it, just with different details. So at this point, we're kind of just making the same movie over and over. And not just that, but in this movie specifically, it's weird because in a lot of biopics, it usually shows a troubled side or conflicts that they're having internally that make them seem maybe not like a great person, and then by the end, we're reminded of their legend, or we're reminded why they were good, and they reformed, and they get better, and they see the error of their ways. This one doesn't really do that. And while I respect it, it's just weird because it's like, why would you do this homage to this guy if you're gonna shed bad light on him? Like, by the end, I don't actually find him that great of a guy. He actually seems like kind of a creep. Like, if for some reason Bradley Cooper did win anything for this movie, I just want to know what he would go up on stage and say. It's like, here's to the man who danced with people who were 60 years younger than him at clubs. Thanks, Leonard. So overall, I thought Maestro was definitely a good exercise of seeing Bradley Cooper's range of what he can do visually, and he knows how to direct people, and he knows how to direct in terms of like visuals and shots and lighting and everything. It just felt like I didn't know why they made this movie. It wasn't anything different. It honestly wasn't anything that interesting. I would have liked to have seen so much more behind the creative process. Like, there were so many like themes and concepts and things that they were bringing up in terms of his background, and maybe he won't be a conductor because they won't let him because he's Jewish, or maybe it's not what he wants to do, and if it's not what he wants to do, but he has this gift, does he have an obligation to give it to the world? They had all of these things set up, and then they just went away. They were fine, and then we were just focusing on the relationship for the rest of the time. So I didn't really find it that interesting, although it was technically well done. I'm going to give Maestro a 2 out of 4, making it my next true movie in the middle. On to our next nominee, Past Lives. Past Lives is the story of two long-lost childhood friends reconnecting over a couple of days and the implications on their lives that result. It stars Greta Lee, Teo Yu, and John Magaro. Okay, so one reason that end-of-year rankings really stress me out, even though I still take another month into the next year to do them, is because I know I'm going to see a bunch of movies from the year prior that I didn't put on my list because I hadn't gotten to see it. This is one of them. This has an honorable spot on my top 10 from last year because it is amazing. I was actually really nervous to watch this movie because I knew, even with how subtle and simple it was probably going to break me a little bit. It kind of like This Is Us in very existential, emotional ways. I came out of this movie and actually paused this movie several times just thinking about people in my childhood at school that I knew I hadn't thought about in years, or like looking them up, just because it really gets that concept into your brain. This movie doesn't feel like one that would have as much attention to the visuals. Obviously it's a movie, so you have to have attention to the visuals, but like not as much, making it feel more indie, whether it was intentional or not, and focusing more on the story. But the visuals, a lot of the shots in here are just wonderful. They have a lot of transition shots and cutaways to like scenes and ambiance that's a lot of like the city or a lot of nature or up close shots of plants. And it kind of reminded me of like higher quality, like those writing vlogs or reading vlogs where people will, show you what they're reading and then they'll go outside and they'll have like these kind of transition shots of nature. It was kind of like higher quality versions of that. Plus, they generally just help to set the tone of the movie, being a lot quieter and just kind of everyday life. Plus, I really liked what Celine Song decided to do with the shots of a lot of these conversations, where a lot of them are just static, long two shots, where it just focuses on the characters acting and letting them act in the shot rather than doing a lot of editing, a lot of close-ups, and it only cuts when absolutely necessary. And there are some conversations where it's a lot closer because it's a lot more intimate later on, but especially earlier on when they're kind of awkward, they're repeating or fumbling things because people are awkward. It's just, the camera's just sitting there watching them as they're just kind of awkwardly reconnecting. The story, as you can probably imagine, is very subtle and simple, but very powerful and effective just because of that. It follows these two childhood friends who, when they were younger, when they went to school, one of them was very goals-driven, excelled at everything, always had to be the best at everything, and was very focused on where she was going in her life. Meanwhile, the other guy, the boy, he is more grounded, a little quieter, more reserved, and a little bit more focused on his relationships with people, specifically with her, rather than like his schoolwork. And when Nora immigrates to America, years and years later, Haesung actually finds her. And there's actually like a section where he finds her once while they're in college, and they talk a little bit, and then they fall off again and reconnect again later on, which is where the main part of the movie comes in, because at that point she's married to a guy named Arthur. And of course, that's going to bring up a lot of problems. But does it? I'll get to that in a minute. Their characters are just so well realized, so, I keep saying subtle, but that's the only way I can do it. It's just so realistically, they don't throw anything at you to be like, here's what their character is, but they just let them act and show you who they are. So I said before, does it really actually cause problems that she's married? Yes and no. Yes, obviously it causes a lot of internal conflict, but it doesn't play out in the way that we would normally see it. Because what really puts it over the top for me is how maturely and sensitively this story plays out and how a lot of these topics and conflicts are handled. Specifically in two ways. The first is obviously with the husband, Arthur. Initially, he is seen as the problem, the roadblock, not only just the guy in the way, but specifically in this movie, the white guy in the way of two Koreans meant to be together. Of course, in many, many Hollywood movies or bigger budget movies, they would villainize this guy, make him be, like just such an asshole, and make him be just the worst. So we want to root against him and root for the two that we really want to be together and have love conquer all and all of that. But it's not so simple. And that's not what happens in this movie. They actually go so far as to have this character address that. Nora and Arthur are both writers in this movie, so he knows this trope. He would be the white guy in the way and kind of the villain of the story. And while I initially did see him as a problem, and I was like, God, this guy sucks, he's in the way, they detail and flesh him out so much that you're like, damn, he's a good guy. And so it's so hard because then, like, what do you do? Is there is the story going to play out like a plot? Is there anything that we can do to fix this? There's nothing to be fixed. It sucks. This is just what life is. And so the other way that they handle this movie really maturely is within their relationship between Nora and Haesung. Again, there's nothing they can do. They're not gonna make this movie like, let's get Arthur out of the way, we'll be together, and I'm gonna win you over. They just sort of awkwardly reconnect and kind of have this weird, obviously there's a big thing going on here that no one wants to mention, but basically instead of having a huge argument or, some really big plot device happen, they basically are just left with sitting with each other and being able to wonder what it could have been in another life if they were together. I'm sure he probably would have loved doing laundry and taxes with her, but we don't know. And so they pretty much just spend the movie acknowledging this and reconnecting, but knowing that there's not much that you can do. And I don't want to say this as a spoiler, because it's not really. There's other stuff that happens in the movie, but honestly, this movie isn't one that can necessarily, I guess, have spoilers, because it's not like any one big twist happens. It's just like, yeah, this is just adult conversations and handling things maturely and sitting in these weird life situations where it sucks, but it just is what it is. And it's so sad, but there's something also really poetic about it. It's so refreshing to have a movie where you can sit with this really tragic but also sort of beautiful life circumstance and just have discourse on how weird and sad and joyful life is, and not have a huge ending, but just sit with that, and then even after the movie is over, you can see that the characters still have changed. I've also changed. It gives me existential dread. What is the point of anything? We're all gonna die anyway. What's the point of love? Should we reconnect with past people? Should we just let them go? If we reconnected, what would that turn into? So overall, Past Lives is one of the absolute best movies I have seen from last year, and probably from this decade. It is so simple, but I just keep thinking about it, and I keep feeling about it, and I'm probably going to be crying for the next several of my lives. And it's one that you can always come back to because the movie won't have changed, but you might have changed. And you can get probably different things from it. And it's not like you already know this spoiler or that spoiler, so it ruins it. It's just like, it's just a slice of life. And it really just depends on where you are in your life at the moment, how you're going to take this movie. I'm going to give Past Lives a 4 out of 4, making it my next top shelf movie. Well, guys, let me know what you thought of Maestro or Past Lives if you've seen them, and what you think of American Fiction, The Zone of Interest, Anatomy of a Fall if you've seen those. I really, really want to see them, but they are just limited in theaters, and at times I can't see, and or $20 to rent, which I'm not doing. Also, just let me know what your favorite movie is. Let's just be excited about movies. And as always, keep your hopes high, your stress low, and movies right in the middle. I'll see you guys later.